Have you ever noticed how much power you give away when you desperately want to be understood, loved, or approved of? How every glance, every silence, every delayed reply feels like a verdict on your worth? It's as if your soul is chained to invisible strings pulled by people who never earned the right to hold them. We grow up believing that caring too much, about opinions, about acceptance, about being liked, is a sign of virtue. Yet, somewhere along the way, that caring mutates into weakness, into dependence. You spend nights overthinking words that were never worth your sleeplessness. You bend yourself into shapes so unnatural just to fit into someone else's picture of you. And still, it's never enough. But here's the question. What if the moment you stopped chasing, stopped begging, stopped clinging, everything shifted? What if letting go wasn't loss, but liberation? The greatest illusion of power is control, and the greatest reversal comes when the one who once begged simply no longer cares, because silence terrifies those who once fed on your attention, and detachment becomes the loudest scream they'll ever hear. Most people are raised with the belief that caring endlessly is a virtue. We're told to give without restraint, to love without conditions, to show loyalty even when it hurts us. On the surface, this sounds noble. It paints an image of kindness and selflessness, of someone who holds nothing back. Yet beneath that ideal lies a subtle trap. The more you give without boundaries, the more others assume your energy has no value. What once felt like generosity begins to look like submission. What once felt like love begins to look like desperation. The truth is that constant availability breeds invisibility. The more you prove that you will always be there no matter what, the more others stop noticing that you even exist. They stop fearing the loss of you because they assume you cannot be lost. In that assumption, respect erodes. The sad irony is that what begins as an attempt to strengthen connection often weakens it, until nothing remains but quiet resentment. Human psychology operates on contrast. We value what feels rare, what carries the possibility of absence, what has weight because it is not guaranteed. When you care without measure, without pause, without the courage to pull back, you strip your presence of contrast. You become like air, essential but invisible. People breathe you in without thinking, without appreciation, without fear of suffocation. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both, because fear preserves authority in ways affection cannot. But in relationships, the principle takes a softer form. It is not terror, but the awareness of limits that commands respect. When people realize they cannot push endlessly, when they know your presence is not an eternal entitlement, only then do they hold it with care. Caring too much, too openly, too desperately, erases that boundary. It creates the illusion that no matter how they treat you, you will remain. And in that illusion, their gratitude fades, their respect collapses. The misconception deepens when society glorifies sacrifice as the highest form of love. Stories, movies, even cultural teachings often praise the character who gives everything, who abandons their own needs to satisfy others. But rarely do those stories show the aftermath, the burnout, the emptiness, the quiet despair of the one who poured endlessly and received nothing in return. Sacrifice without balance is not strength. It is slow self-destruction. People confuse caring with clutching, giving with groveling, devotion with dependency. They fail to see that what masquerades as love is often fear, the fear of being abandoned, of being unloved, of being unworthy. And so they hold on tighter, thinking it will save them. Yet the tighter the grip, the faster respect slips away. It is not that caring itself is wrong, but that caring without self-respect becomes indistinguishable from weakness. In the eyes of others, what is too easily gained is too easily dismissed. The mind, conditioned by scarcity, devalues abundance when it comes without cost. Think of the countless times you may have bent yourself into impossible shapes just to be accepted. You answered messages immediately, even when your own mind begged for rest. You apologized for things that were never your fault. You tolerated disrespect, thinking patience would eventually awaken gratitude in them. But instead of gratitude, you found entitlement. Instead of closeness, you discovered distance. Because the more you surrendered, the more invisible you became. Here lies the cruel paradox. In attempting to prove your worth, you erased it. By trying to show how much you cared, you accidentally showed how little you valued yourself. And people, sensing that absence of self-value, mirrored it back to you. They treated you the way you treated yourself, as if you were disposable, replaceable, irrelevant, not because they consciously wished to hurt you, but because human nature takes for granted what does not fight for its own place. The conflict becomes sharper when you realize how differently people respond when you withhold your energy. The same friend who ignored your calls begins to chase when you stop calling. The partner who dismissed your affection suddenly panics when your silence replaces your neediness. The employer who overlooked your effort starts noticing when you no longer strive for recognition. This reversal is not proof of their love, but of a hidden truth about human behavior. Attention is a currency, and scarcity increases its value. When you flood someone with endless care, they stop counting the drops. But when you retreat, when you redirect your energy inward, suddenly every glance, every word, every moment of your presence feels heavier. Their panic is not born from losing you, but from losing the control your care once gave them. They do not fear your absence. They fear the reflection of their own emptiness without your energy to feed on. It is important to understand that detachment is not the same as indifference. Many confuse the two, imagining that stepping back from excessive caring means becoming cold or heartless. But detachment is not about rejecting love. It is about refusing to let love chain you. It is not about abandoning loyalty. It is about ensuring loyalty does not suffocate your dignity. Detachment is the art of giving without losing yourself, of caring without collapsing, of being present without being consumed. It is the maturity to recognize that your worth is not measured by how much you tolerate, but by how much you value yourself. The world respects strength cloaked in silence far more than desperation dressed as devotion. When you detach, you teach people that your presence is not free, that it is earned by respect, by reciprocity, by care that flows in both directions. Without detachment, caring becomes currency without weight. With detachment, it becomes priceless. And so, the misconception collapses under its own weight. The idea that caring more guarantees love is false. The idea that loyalty without boundaries creates security is false. The idea that endless giving ensures gratitude is false. The truth is that people often only begin to notice what they stand to lose when it is no longer endlessly available. That does not make them cruel, it makes them human. But understanding this truth frees you from the cycle of overgiving. It allows you to see that the respect you long for does not come from amplifying your care, but from balancing it with self-worth. The conflict between what we were taught and what life reveals is painful, yet it is in that pain that wisdom grows. To care deeply without losing yourself, to give generously without erasing your value, and to love fully without forgetting that your first loyalty is to your own soul. There comes a time in almost every life when the weight of giving becomes unbearable. You look back at the friendships where you poured your soul into conversations, where you listened at 3 a.m., where you stayed long after others would have left, only to discover that when you needed the same devotion, silence greeted you. You replay those moments in your mind, wondering if maybe you didn't give enough, if maybe you weren't kind enough, patient enough, forgiving enough. But the truth sits quietly in the corner of your memory. It was never about not being enough. It was about giving to people who had already decided they did not need to value you. And yet, when you finally stopped sending that last message, when you no longer extended your energy into a void, suddenly they remembered your name. Suddenly, your absence rang louder than your presence ever did. It was then you realized that sometimes the loudest no is not spoken but lived. And it is that silence that begins the transformation. Their romantic relationships carry the same lesson with sharper edges. You think love means carrying the weight of two people, sacrificing your joy so the other person never feels discomfort, apologizing for storms you didn't create. You bend, you stretch, you compromise until you barely recognize your reflection in the mirror. And yet, the more you yield, the more they demand. They treat your forgiveness like an endless well, believing it can never run dry, until one day, you stop. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. And in that moment, the air changes. The partner who rolled their eyes at your tears begins to fear your silence. The one who ignored your pleas suddenly trembles at your indifference. They don't panic because they've lost you. They panic because they can no longer control you. That shift becomes the seed of transformation. You learn that true love cannot be built on chains of desperation, but must stand on pillars of mutual respect. Work and career reflect the same dynamic in a different disguise. You grind tirelessly, arriving early, staying late, taking on responsibilities others avoid, believing that dedication will lead to recognition. But what often follows is not gratitude, but exploitation. The workplace consumes your energy because you show no sign of resisting. Every task completed only births another demand. Every sacrifice only convinces them that you can handle more. And then, one day, you stop chasing their approval. You do your work with integrity but refuse to bleed for validation. Suddenly, the same managers who overlooked your contributions now question your quiet distance. Colleagues who assumed you would always carry the extra weight begin to feel unease in your calm refusal. This transformation is not about rebellion, but realization. The respect you seek arrives not when you exhaust yourself, but when you demonstrate that your worth cannot be purchased by mere overwork. In holding back, you hold power. Even within families, where love is assumed to be unconditional, the pattern repeats. Perhaps you were the child who always kept the peace, who swallowed your needs so harmony could survive. Perhaps you were the sibling who always said yes, who bore responsibility far beyond your years. For a time, this role feels like honor, like duty, like proof of love. But as the years pass, you notice that your silence is not appreciated, it is expected. Your sacrifices are not celebrated, they are demanded, and then, one day, you break the script. You say no, you walk away from a fight that is not yours, you choose yourself instead of their comfort. At first, panic ripples through the family. They call you selfish, cold, unrecognizable. But beneath their anger lies something else, the dawning awareness that you will no longer be the one who holds everything together at the cost of your own soul. In that transformation, you find freedom, the kind that feels both terrifying and exhilarating. The transformation is not always external. Often, it is an internal storm. It is the moment you catch yourself staring into the mirror, exhausted from chasing validation that never arrives, and you whisper, "Enough." It is the night you turn off your phone and feel, for the first time, the quiet of not being reachable. It is the morning you wake up and realize you don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace. At first, guilt crashes over you because you were trained to equate boundaries with cruelty, but over time, guilt softens into clarity, and clarity hardens into strength. You begin to understand that transformation is not about teaching others to love you better. It is about teaching yourself to stop begging for scraps of love. The relationships may shift, some may end, but the new ones that emerge are built on a foundation you never knew you had: self-respect. And as this transformation deepens, you start noticing details you once ignored. The way people adjust their tone when they realize you no longer absorb disrespect. The sudden politeness from those who once dismissed you. The lingering glances of those who cannot understand how you broke free from their hold. It almost feels surreal at first, like stepping into a new world where the rules are inverted. You see clearly that people respond not to your desperation, but to your detachment. They are not drawn to your constant availability, but to your self-assured restraint. And slowly, you stop blaming them for how they treated you, because you recognize the role you played. You allowed it, tolerated it, fed it. And by choosing differently, you no longer need to demand respect. It comes to you naturally, as if pulled by the gravity of your newfound strength. The most profound transformation arrives when you stop seeking their panic as proof of your worth, because in the beginning it is tempting to find satisfaction in their sudden fear, their desperate attempts to pull you back. But as you grow, you realize that their reaction is not the victory, it is only the symptom. The true victory is the quiet steadiness inside you, the unshakable center that no longer trembles at rejection or silence. You realize you are not here to manipulate their emotions, but to master your own. Their panic may validate you for a moment, but it is your peace that sustains you forever. And in that final shift, transformation becomes complete. You no longer care about whether they chase you or not, because you are no longer running after anyone. You stand still, whole, enough, and for the first time in your life, you feel free. At first, Awakening does not feel like power. It feels like emptiness. After years of being defined by how much you give, by how much you care, by how much you bend, pulling back feels almost unbearable. The silence is heavy. The phone doesn't ring as often. The people who once demanded your presence seem distant, and for a while you wonder if you've made a mistake. You've built an identity around being needed, and without that constant tug on your energy, you feel lost. But slowly the quiet begins to shift. What felt like emptiness transforms into space, and in that space you hear a voice you had long forgotten, your own. It whispers softly at first, reminding you of the dreams you silenced, the boundaries you erased, the passions you abandoned. Awakening begins not with fireworks or triumph, but with a fragile realization. You exist outside of their approval, and that is enough. The more you lean into that silence, the stronger you become. You notice that solitude, once terrifying, holds a strange kind of light. It illuminates the parts of you that were always there but buried beneath noise. You begin to see your scars differently, no longer as disfigurements, but as maps of survival. Each line carved into your skin, a testament that you endured. You start to understand that your worth was never diminished by the way others failed to honor you. It was only hidden beneath the layers of your own desperation. Awakening is the uncovering of that worth. It is the moment you stop looking outward for validation and realize that the approval you've been chasing has been sitting quietly inside you, waiting to be noticed. It is the slow, steady process of coming home to yourself. There is a sacredness to this shift. You walk into a crowded room and feel no urge to impress. You listen to conversations without needing to insert yourself just to be acknowledged. You stand beside people who once shook your confidence, and instead of shrinking, you remain still, rooted. The awakening is not loud, not dramatic. It is subtle. It's in the way your shoulders no longer carry invisible weight, in the way your breath flows freely without fear of judgment. The silence that once scared you becomes your sanctuary. You realize that solitude is not loneliness. It is the soil where self-respect grows. And as you water it with patience and discipline, you see the first blooms of something rare, unshakable peace. It is then you understand that you have stepped into a power no one can take from you, because it is built not on their recognition, but on your acceptance. The world around you starts to respond differently. People sense a shift they cannot name. The ones who once tested your limits hesitate before crossing them. The ones who once took you for granted speak your name with a new caution, a new weight. You haven't threatened them. You haven't raised your voice, but your energy speaks louder than words. The awakening radiates through your presence. It tells people, without needing to explain, that you are no longer available for disrespect, and it is in this silent communication that true power resides. You don't demand respect, you command it. You don't beg for love, you embody it. You don't chase after belonging, you create it within yourself. And as others witness this shift, some draw nearer with genuine admiration, while others retreat, unsettled by the strength they cannot control. Either way, you remain unmoved, because the awakening has taught you that your value is not determined by who stays or who leaves. But awakening is not without pain. It forces you to shed identities you wore for years. You let go of the rescuer, the people-pleaser, the one who always said yes. At times, this feels like tearing your own skin, because those roles once gave you purpose. You grieve the relationships that crumble under the weight of your new boundaries. You mourn the old self that believed love was something to be earned rather than something to be shared. The awakening is as much about loss as it is about gain. Yet within that loss lies liberation. For every bond that breaks, space is created for connections rooted in truth. For every illusion shattered, clarity takes its place. And though tears may fall, you come to understand that pain is not the enemy of awakening, it is the proof of it. Like fire consuming a forest, so new life can emerge. The discomfort of this stage clears the ground for your rebirth. Over time, the awakening becomes less about others and more about you. You start honoring your rhythms, protecting your energy, investing in your growth. You discover joy in the smallest details, the taste of a quiet morning coffee, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the sound of your own laughter echoing without shame. These moments feel insignificant to the world, but to you they are revolutions. For the first time you are living not to meet expectations, but to experience existence. You no longer search for mirrors in other people to see your worth. You carry the reflection within. Awakening shifts the very fabric of your reality. Time slows, presence deepens, and what once drained you no longer has power. It is not a dramatic transformation that others can always see, but an inner sovereignty that you feel in every breath. You realize that your life, long held hostage by their opinions, finally belongs to you. And with this realization, the awakening solidifies into a way of being. You no longer fear silence. You embrace it. You no longer resist solitude. You cherish it. You no longer cling to the roles that once chained you. You shed them like old skin. In their place stands someone both softer and stronger, scarred but radiant, quiet but unshakable. You learn that strength is not about loudness, not about control. True strength is the stillness of a soul that no longer trembles at the thought of rejection. It is the calm of a heart that does not need validation to know its worth. It is the peace of a mind that has stopped chasing and finally rests. And in that stillness, you awaken fully, no longer defined by the weight of others' expectations, but by the light of your own becoming. When you stop caring in the way the world expects, something extraordinary happens. You return to yourself. For so long you were convinced that worth came from how tightly you held on, how endlessly you gave, how tirelessly you proved yourself. But in the quiet of detachment, you discover that worth was never something external to chase. It was always the essence of who you are. The world may panic, people may grow uneasy, but that reaction is not your burden to carry. Their panic is the mirror of their dependence on your energy, their discomfort with your strength, their fear of losing control. You begin to see that their response is not about love, but about losing access to a resource they once consumed without gratitude. And in that realization, a new clarity blooms. Freedom is not found in controlling others, but in releasing yourself from the need to be controlled. This freedom reshapes the way you see life itself. You no longer measure your days by how much approval you collect or how many people you manage to please. Instead, you measure your days by the depth of your own peace, by the consistency of your truth, by the alignment of your actions with your inner values. It is not arrogance to live this way. It is authenticity. To walk through the world without the constant hunger for validation is not to become empty, but to become full, to overflow with a strength that does not depend on applause. You realize that you were never meant to be a servant to other people's shifting expectations. You were meant to be a sovereign being, whole in your solitude, luminous in your silence. And this sovereignty does not isolate you. It attracts connections built on genuine respect. The revolution that begins within you is subtle, yet unshakable. It is not a rebellion that shouts. It is a transformation that whispers. You are no longer swayed by every opinion, no longer broken by every rejection, no longer chained by every silence. Instead, you move with a quiet steadiness, rooted in the knowledge that your worth is not negotiable. People may try to test you, to pull you back into old patterns of overgiving, but the awakened self no longer plays those games. You do not need to argue, to explain, to justify. Your silence speaks. Your boundaries stand, and those who cannot meet you there naturally fall away, while those who can rise to meet you are drawn closer. This is the paradox of transformation. By no longer caring in desperation, you invite a deeper, truer form of love than you ever thought possible. As this awakening solidifies, you begin to understand that the real victory was never about making others panic. Their unease is temporary, but your peace is permanent. The true revolution is not the outward shift in how people respond to you, but the inward shift in how you respond to yourself. For the first time, you look in the mirror and see someone worthy, not because of what they give away, but because of what they carry within. You see scars as evidence of survival, solitude as evidence of strength, silence as evidence of wisdom. The call you once made to others, see me, value me, love me, is no longer necessary, because you have answered it yourself, and in that self-recognition, you find a power that no rejection can shatter, no absence can diminish, no disapproval can erase. The world may never fully understand this transformation, but that no longer matters. What matters is that you understand it, that you live it, that you embody it. You no longer chase after belonging because you have become your own home. You no longer beg for respect because you carry it in your posture, in your presence, in your unwavering boundaries. You no longer yearn for love from those who cannot give it, because you have cultivated a love for yourself that sustains you. This love is not loud or boastful. It is steady, patient, enduring. It is the kind of love that does not need to prove itself, because it exists as naturally as breath. And once you carry this love, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly treats you better, but because you no longer allow it to treat you worse. So let the world panic if it must. Let others wrestle with the silence they once mocked, with the strength they never expected, with the freedom they cannot control. That is their battle, not yours. Your role is not to shrink so they feel secure, nor to explain so they feel comfortable. Your role is to live as a whole being, to stand in your truth without trembling, to let your very existence become a reminder that the deepest revolution is inner transformation. You don't need to fight for the throne of their approval. You have already claimed the kingdom within yourself, and when you live from that place, when your soul whispers, "I am free," you carry a power no one can steal. That is the quiet, sovereign call to action, not to demand, not to chase, but to simply be whole, rooted, free.